there's actually any tape in it, so
No.
I doubt that I'll have.
Figure of speech.
We are live, so.
But Ramona was very excited about the Ecclesia tape because she's gonna go visit Sue Bigler and let her take a copy.
Well, first a disclaimer. This is an experiment. This is, I don't know how this is gonna go, so bear with me, we'll see. I haven't led a Bible study like this or in this way, and I'm glad that there are several of you here to ask questions and give input. As I mentioned in the email, we're starting with 1st Isaiah. Who doesn't know what 1st Isaiah means? Does that make sense to everybody? Good. Well, we will cover that.
You said good, but I raised my hand.
We'll go over that.
Oh, I guess it was good that we didn't go.
And the reason that I wanted to do just Isaiah in sections, because there's actually, they break it up into 3 sections generally. 1st Isaiah, 2nd Isaiah, 3rd Isaiah. I thought that for our time together, it would give us a little less to deal with, a little less to chew on once we tried to bite it off, and might settle us in a little more easily. Isaiah was chosen because Paula was the only one that came back with a suggestion of where to start, and that was her response to us not using Isaiah so thoroughly through Advent as we might in other years. However, we get Isaiah this coming Sunday, and we get Isaiah one of the Sundays of Advent, so it is there. The problem that we run into with Isaiah is that the history that's behind it that we have to know is huge and deep and convoluted. And I'm going to try and give you that in a very general sense tonight. So it's going to feel like I'm preaching to you or reading a story. But it's really integral to understanding the context of where Isaiah is and what he's writing out of, at least through the first 39 chapters. Okay, so I brought some maps. I'm thinking I might try to do a timeline. We'll see how that goes. I simply ran out of time to get everything ready because it's such a huge undertaking. I need to open this. I don't know if anybody else is one, but I am.
May I just ask a question before you get into that? Can
Absolutely.
you talk a little bit about the process?
Sure.
Of what we're going, do we all converse on the same night, for example, or do we just throw our comments in willy-nilly, or,
Well, we all converse on the same night in that we will converse on this night.
Yeah.
As far as the difficulty of trying to say we're going to converse next Tuesday is that creates schedules that are difficult for everybody. So really what we'll do is we'll post comments, questions, start threads. I know we're going to have to work at that. I know there's going to have to be some training and some manipulation. We're just going to have to see how it goes. And I'll try and work with that as best I can.
So it would just be whenever it's, like, I would post whenever it's convenient for me to
Right.
do so.
Right,
Okay.
right. So from tonight, you will go with your head full of all this stuff, or maybe not, I don't know. And you'll go and you'll start reading, aware of that context, hopefully in a way that you hadn't been aware of it before, to be able to say, oh, okay, so while we generally get this 5 or 6 verse text on a Sunday, now I'm reading the whole thing, and now I need to be able to put these pieces together. What is Isaiah talking about? And hopefully that's some of what we can uncover here. But if you come up with other questions, what does this mean? Who is this talking about? Why does this seem to be so out of order? Ask it, and we can all sort of pitch in and try and do that. And so that's what we'll do, up until the next gathering that we'll have. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's,
Are there any other questions of process at this point? And I mean, if you don't feel like, you know, as you read, if you don't feel like you want to ask questions, you don't have to. You can just listen to other people or read, listen visually to other people or you know, whatever's your comfort level.
I didn't try getting into the Google group that
Okay.
you mentioned yet, but I plan on it. Is it
Okay.
It should be easy.
difficult?
No, you should be able to go back to that invitation I sent.
Right.
I might need to send it again because those do expire.
Oh.
Currently on the Google group, I have Aaron, Amy, Dave Thornburg, Judy Miller, Matt, Nikki, Paula, and Tricia. So those are the people those are the current members. And if it seems to be really cumbersome, then maybe what I'll do is at the next one, we can do a tutorial. Maybe I should have done that this time, but you know, we're just sort of feeling our way through
No
this.
problem. I think there are several people within the group who would be able to be available for help.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? Process. What do you know about Isaiah? What do you think about Isaiah? What can we say about Isaiah?
I usually hear it when I hear the Messiah,
Okay.
Handel's Messiah.
Okay.
There seems to be a vision of a better time. I think in some of the, I mean, the Advent, the hope.
I hear a lot of straighten up and fly right.
It takes a lot of it's a source for a lot of New Testament back references.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, very
So-
much so.
Kind of get that feeling like, okay, this is what to expect. Fit it in as you will.
Okay. And so two of the comments we've heard are using the idea of a prophet as sort of a future teller, right? And that's sometimes how we think of it, but I'm not sure that's right. I'm not sure that's exactly what Isaiah would have had in mind of who he was. Abram Heschel describes a prophet as not as a soothsayer, but as a mouthpiece for God, and you know, in a very unique position. And some of the resources that I will be using for this are Christopher Seat's Isaiah, at least this first one for tonight, Abram Heschel's The Prophets, which does a wonderful job of going through a lot of the history. In fact, the history that I have compiled, much of it has come out of this, and I've just sort of compacted it that I'm going to go through tonight. And then Brueggemann is a common Old Testament scholar. And really, if you have any other resources that you want to bring into the conversation, you're welcome to. You know, so-and-so says this, so-and-so says that. Well, I thought I've got this really unique book. It's called Chronicle of the World. And what it does is it sort of starts from, well, somewhere around the beginning. 40,000 to 8,000 BC is compacted into a fairly little article. But it does have some things as we get into sort of the context that we're looking at today. And so I just thought it might be interesting to say, and they're all written sort of as newspaper articles. And so I thought, well, what if we took a look at what Isaiah might have read when he looked at the newspaper in his day? So here's one that is splendid new Assyrian capital at Nineveh. Nineveh, Assyria, around 700 before the current era, BCE. A new Assyrian capital has risen here out of the ruins of the old city, reviving the tradition of Nineveh as the home of Assyrian kings. Under the direction of the new Sennacherib, who is maintaining the royal tradition of surpassing his predecessors, a palace without rival has been built according to the positions of the stars in the skies and the gods in the heavens. The most magnificent Assyrian capital yet built, it is surrounded by a 2-mile-long wall. At the heart of the city, the Tebiltu has been diverted and, and a rock platform built into the old riverbed to give the palace citadel a natural riverside terrace. The foundations measure 360 by 204 yards, more than twice the size of the old royal residence. 2 enormous copper pillars, each resting on 4 bronze lions, form the uprights to the palace gates, which are topped with 2 great cedars. 4 mountain sheep cast in silver and copper and pointing in the directions of the 4 winds adorn the entrances. At the side of the palace is a great park boasting all kinds of herbs and fruit trees. Major irrigation works for it include a 300-yard-long aqueduct, canals, dams, basins, and the straightening of 2 rivers. So that's the development of the new capital, Nineveh. We've all heard of Nineveh, in Assyria, as Assyria comes into its power and presence. See, that's a little farther along than I wanted. Some of these are really long, and I don't want to take up our time reading them. Israel, circa 750 BCE, and this is actually going back further. Amos, a
Sorry to
prophet of
interrupt.
Judah.
Bro, but what year did Isaiah live?
Well, I'm going to get into that.
Oh, okay, go
I
ahead.
was just going to give you some context because it sort of gives a vision of
Okay.
where we're at.
Okay.
On that day, according to Amos, the justice of the Lord will be seen to be done, and the children of Israel will suffer for their unrighteous ways. So that kind of gets into your,
Straighten up.
straighten up and fly right. Syria, 732, with the fall of Damascus to the Assyrians, Syria is finally subjected. Samaria, Tyre, and Byblos recognized Assyrian authority when Tiglath-Pileser broke up a second Syrian coalition. And we'll hear those names again as we go. Babylon, 729 BC. After stamping out a Babylonian revolution, Tiglath-Pileser III, king of Assyria, names himself king of Babylon. So yeah, if you wanted to take a look at any of those at any time, I mean, we've got lots of history on Assyria throughout a lot of these different aspects and
And
pictures.
modern day Assyria is what?
Modern day Assyria, Iraq,
Northern Iraq.
yeah. And I have some maps that we'll go through as we go.
Maybe it was Syria. Okay.
North before Babylon would have been up the rivers more, whereas Babylon would be down toward the Persian Gulf.
And Nineveh is where?
The capital
Is the capital of?
of Assyria,
Oh, okay,
right there.
okay.
One thing I thought it might be important to establish, you guys have, you've probably heard of the 12 tribes of Israel, right? And how there was a northern kingdom, which was Israel, and Samaria will often be talked of as Samaria, and the northern king, or the southern kingdom, which is Judah, okay? So that'll be important to keep in mind as I go through the history, that there is let's see. These might be a way to look at it. I only ran a handful off. So you can see here that Samaria is listed and Judah is listed. Okay, well, that's actually two of them. And Matt's got it memorized. So it's important to sort of keep those things in mind as I go through this story that I'm going to tell you to give you context and background. A significant individual at that time is this, and Matt can pronounce it how he might know it, Tiglath-Pileser. And this is a stone cutout of him that they excavated. So this is traditionally how he looks when he's depicted. And he was part of much of this tumultuous time that we're gonna be talking about. What's that?
Should have said who was that and
Well, I know I'm throwing out a lot of things, but I'm gonna go through it. I just wanna establish some names and some prolegomena, things you need to know before I tell you what you need to know. The HarperCollins Study Bible, that's what I had talked about. If you were looking to buy a study Bible, that's what I use. It's one of my favorites, and I have a number of different study Bibles. Here's what the HarperCollins Study Bible says about the book of Isaiah. It says, the book of Isaiah is a composite work, the product of several different prophets who ministered at different periods in the history of Israel. Scholars normally distinguish between three main sections in the book. So we have first Isaiah, which is chapters 1 through 39. And that's referred to as first Isaiah, right? And attributed in general to the 8th century Judean prophet whose name bears the book. So that kind of begins to give you a date. Second Isaiah is chapters 40 through 55. These are also called Deutero-Isaiah, and they're attributed to an unknown prophet who lived in Babylon during the Babylonian exile of the 6th century. And then there's chapters 56 through 66. And these are attributed to a prophet, or perhaps multiple prophets, who lived in Judah following the return from the Babylonian exile in 539 BCE. Now, with First Isaiah, all we're going to cover is the history of 4 kings that then sort of ends just before the second diaspora or the exile of Judah. Interpreters now agree that we can see within chapters 1 through 39 evidence of literary additions from the experience of the fall of Jerusalem and the exile. And so what that means is that even as these books were developed and these writings were collected, as they were passed around, as the oral traditions carried on, that you can see that people looked even at this historical aspect, these first early chapters, and said, hey, we know where we've been. And so that mindset of where they've already been gets placed in a lot of ways back into those first 39 chapters. Does that make sense? If you were to write your life story from where you are now, you couldn't help but let what you've known or what you've experienced through your life somehow influence the writing of your first 10 years or your first 20 years, or your first 30 years, because you know some of the outcomes that you didn't know when you were experiencing them. And so as scholars look at these works, that's a lot of what they're seeing. They're saying, okay, well, it's saying this, but we know they wouldn't necessarily have known that until after the exile. Okay, so when I use the word exile, does that make sense?
I guess I need a little more
Okay,
explanation.
yeah. So, let's see. So, you'll hear me talk about the northern kingdom, Israel, and how they were attacked, and they were basically dispersed throughout Assyria once they were taken captive. And it was mostly the wealthy people because they seemed more prominent and more likely to revolt. And so they were dispersed. And we don't know really why they were dispersed and not taken to one particular place. But when Judah falls and they're taken captive, they're actually taken into Babylon and set up in a community of sorts where they can live and they can practice their religion. They're still, enslaved to a degree, but given a decent amount of freedom until the Edict of Cyrus, till the Persians come, and the Edict of Cyrus tells them they can go home. But what percentage actually went home? 10%? 20%? A lot of them stayed.
A lot of them stay.
They just stayed. They said, here we are. So we're going to be talking specifically about Judah, the southern kingdom, because that's who Isaiah is prophesying to. But I'm going to give you history of both. So first Isaiah is going to be the history of the four kings. Of Judah, basically, and how Isaiah interacts with them. Second Isaiah and third Isaiah, to a degree, move into the exile in Babylon. And you're going to hear me use different terms because Assyria seems to be the thorn in the side of, well, the entire region early on. But then Babylon comes and Assyria is overthrown. And then the Persians come and overthrow the Babylons, and we get this return from exile, which you'll also see part of in 3rd Isaiah and several of the readings.
So the people that chose to stay still declared themselves no longer in exile? Or did they?
I would say we might speak of it as they have just become part of that country,
Enculturated.
part of that, yeah. And they said, we've built houses, we have money, we have jobs, we have lives.
And those returning weren't returning to an independent Israel. It was still a vassal state to Persia there. So it wasn't freedom per se, but it was just you go back to your country. You still have to pay us taxes.
Right, right.
And
Right.
how much time was it, or we're talking generations?
Well,
Because you said four kings, but that
I'm
doesn't.
gonna try and work on a timeline. We'll see how that goes. I might have to fill it in as we go.
Because 4 kings could be 1 year, or it could be.
Sure. And this is where we come to dating Isaiah, because in the opening of Isaiah, here's how it begins. The vision of Isaiah, son of Amos, which he saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah. And so that's where we begin to date Isaiah. So according to the first chapter, we have these 4 kings, and that Isaiah prophesied during the reign of these 4 kings. So if the vision in Isaiah 6:1 is Isaiah's inaugural vision, if I right? If the vision in Isaiah 6:1 is Isaiah's inaugural vision, he began to prophesy in the year of Uzziah's death, which dates around 738 BCE. And while the end of his ministry is less certain, it seems as if it lasted until 701 or possibly even 688 BCE. Okay, so we have, I don't want to build this into the timeline yet. So we have, let's say, Isaiah's ministry. Running from that's a 738 to 701 is really the one I see most often. Okay, now this, when I say BCE, does everybody have a good picture of that in their heads? Okay, so if Jesus, if
Before
Jesus
Common Era?
is year one, right? BCE is Common Era, is before Common Era. It's what we used to call BC, before Christ,
Oh,
okay?
okay.
And AD is Anno Domini, or we say after death. So here's where we get year one and beyond, okay? Which means that everything leading up to this this is year one BCE, okay? Before the current era. So then you're gonna have year two, because it's 2 years before the
Sure.
current era.
Sure.
This being, this Jesus, at least in our calendars, being the dating process,
Right.
okay? Right, so, yeah, so they say that
Let's not
he
go.
probably wasn't really born until 3, but that's, that's,
Yeah.
okay, so with placement during these reigns, many scholars place first Isaiah firmly in the 8th century, around 740 BCE to 700 BCE. The last significant event being recorded in first Isaiah is the siege of Jerusalem. Okay, so that's where Sennacherib has come in and is trying to take Hezekiah, who is the 4th king that we're going to talk about
What
tonight.
year was that? I'm sorry.
700, 701.
Oh, okay.
And that's where you'll end, because we'll read up to 39, so you'll see 36, 37, and 38 and 39. So traceable to the reign of Uzziah and Judah is the beginning of the Assyrian threat in the person of Tiglath-Pileser, who I had showed you before,
Oh,
which
Tiglath-Pileser.
which by modern reckoning takes place about 744 BCE. Okay, so this is really
There you go.
convoluted, but here's a good place for you to get a fairly brief history, okay? Second Chronicles chapters, 26, I've got it here somewhere, we'll get to it. If you have a Bible and you flip to 2 Chronicles 26, you'll begin to see these names that I'm going to name, okay? The reign of Ahaz, the reign of Jotham, the reign of, actually that was out of order, but Uzziah, and then Jotham, and then Ahaz, and then Hezekiah. Okay? So as a precursor to your reading of Isaiah, it might not hurt to peruse those chapters a little bit.
Any particular part of Second Chronicles or all of it?
Chapters 26 through, is 30 the end of it, or does it go to 33? Because you don't need to go to the end of it, that really goes too far. I have it in my notes, I'll read it as I'm telling you the story.
By 32, you get Sennacherib invading, so.
Yeah, so through 32, because
Oh,
that's where we come up against the rise of Manasseh.
This is the one where they come and they yell at the city, and then there's a prayer, and suddenly, depending on if you're reading the Assyrian version or the
Chapters 26 through
Israelite version,
Oh, is that what?
Assyria records it a little differently, saying, and we caged Hezekiah up like a bird in a cage or something like that.
Right. I'm going to give you the Christian version. For all of its lack and its mistake, and actually, I mean, this is Heschel's version, so, so I would say it's his Jewish version, although I'm sure not all scholars would agree with him. So I thought the best way to do this, because it's really long and convoluted, is I'm just gonna sort of give it to you like a story, okay? And it's not gonna be in great detail, but we'll have a chance afterward. We can ask some questions. If it's helpful for you to have what I've put together, I'm happy to share that.
I think I did this as a Sunday school class about 10 years ago, and it took like 6 weeks.
Well, good. So you'll be able to help me answer all
No, that was 10 years
wonderful,
ago.
all these wonderful questions that come up in the process.
What are you giving to us as a story?
The backstory that exists, placing Isaiah, the first Isaiah, in context.
Okay.
Okay? So we know that it starts out saying that he prophesied in these 4 kings' reign, during these 4 kings' reign, right? So it appears that the book of 1st Isaiah is interested in 2 specific historical events. The attempt by the northern kingdom, which is Israel, and Syria to force Ahaz of Judah to join their coalition, and the 701 BCE invasion by Sennacherib of Assyria during the reign of Hezekiah. The similarity of these accounts draws out the contrast between Ahaz and Hezekiah, which I'll say more about in a little bit. The thing is, Isaiah is incredibly critical of Ahaz, but is quite positive about Hezekiah. This in turn may give rise to the interpretation of Emmanuel, which we talked about that we get from this book, often in a Christian context. That's in chapter 7, verse 14, as a royal figure, if not Hezekiah himself. Okay, so, but it might be helpful for us to investigate more of this story as we begin to think about reading 1st Isaiah. As I mentioned earlier, a biblical retelling of this can be found in 2nd Chronicles, chapters 30 to 32. It can also be found in the books of Kings. I like this story better, so that's why I'm giving it to you. As I mentioned, the information that I'm going to share with you, a lot of it comes from Abram Heschel's book. This is not my brilliance in any way, shape, or form, but I tried to cut it down into something that's manageable for this evening and wouldn't take 6 weeks.
Spell Heschel for me, please.
Heschel.
Herschel
like it
without an
sounds.
R.
Herschel without an R. So, under the long reign of Uzziah, which was about and I have terrible handwriting, but you're just going to have to deal with that, which is about 783 to 742. Somebody else wants to write, they're welcome to. Heschel says, in fame second only to Solomon, during this reign, Judah reached the pinnacle of its power. Uzziah worked diligently to build up both the monetary and military resources of the country. He conquered the Philistines and the Arabians and received tribute from the Ammonites. In 2 Chronicles 26:15, we read, in Jerusalem he set up machines invented by skilled workers on the towers and corners for shooting arrows and large stones. And his fame spread far, for he was marvelously helped until he became strong. Uzziah's success as king, administrator, and commander-in-chief in the army made him ruler over the largest realm of Judah since the disruption of the kingdom. However, at the same time, Uzziah's strength became his weakness, as the following verse in 2 Chronicles 26:16 reads, but when he had become strong, he grew proud to his destruction. In his pride, he even attempted to usurp the priesthood, entering the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar, which was a privilege reserved for the priests. This is believed to be the result, or to be the cause of Uzziah contracting leprosy, which he had until he died. And because of his leprosy, Uzziah had to be isolated from the public, at which point his son Jotham took over his public persona. When Uzziah died, Jotham succeeded him as king in about 750 BCE. So, while Jotham becomes this public persona, it's still Uzziah who's calling the shots. Until he dies and Jotham becomes the king.
Was he any relation to?
Yeah, he's his son.
Okay,
He's a
sorry, I
son.
missed that.
I didn't say that.
You probably did.
Yeah, you did.
Under Jotham's reign,
You're saying a lot.
okay,
Okay,
sure.
it's all right.
Under Jotham's reign, Judah continued to be stable, prosperous, and a powerful state. An interesting fact about the prosperity of Judah is that it seems that this prosperity did not simply benefit the aristocracy or the wealthy, as had been the case with the northern kingdom of Israel during this 8th century, or during this same time period. And this is said because all the private houses that have been excavated so far reflect a surprisingly narrow range of variation in social scale, which is an interesting concept to think that all this wealth and prosperity that they had developed wasn't held at just the highest levels and for the wealthiest people. I thought that was interesting. This prosperity and power set Judah at the front of the anti-Assyrian movement when Tiglath-Pileser III, the king of Assyria at that time, began his aggression toward the surrounding areas, beginning with the invasion of Syria in 743. The Assyrian armies, led by Tiglath-Pileser, conquered both Babylon and Syria. Did I hand you, here are some maps on the campaigns of, yeah, there won't be enough to go around, but if you need more, if you really want one and there isn't one, I can certainly make another one. And after conquering Babylon and Syria, they seem to be breathing down the necks of Samaria and Judah, which I believe are also on that page. Right. Samaria and Judah are there. And the reason that they were breathing down the necks of Samaria and Judah is that Assyria actually had its eyes on moving as far as conquering Egypt, which we see is even further to the west. Maybe you don't see it on that. But here on the Empire of Assyria, you see that Egypt is even further over. And so Samaria and Judah are sort of standing in the way. They're the in-between.
Look what happens.
Now, about this time, Samaria forms an alliance with Damascus, and they become involved in what Heschel calls a treacherous adventure against Judah. Now, while they're busy attacking Judah, their defenses are weakened, and Assyria comes in and attacks Samaria, and Samaria falls to Assyria. Now, this aggression actually lasts for the next 2 decades. Something like that. I don't have the dates here. So they're under this aggression, they're under this oppression, but they haven't really completely overtaken Samaria yet. Seeing that this is going to cause certain doom for the northern kingdom, Isaiah has no role in Samaria's destiny or in the northern kingdom's destiny. So that's where we find that his message is directed toward Judah, the southern kingdom. Now, Jotham dies around 735 BCE. And he's succeeded by his son,
Got it. I'm listening.
Ahaz. And Ahaz rules from 735 to 715 BCE. Now Ahaz, when he comes in to reign, finds himself embroiled in a serious crisis, because when the western regions of Judah had become dominated by the Assyrians, they hated it, but there wasn't a whole lot they could do about it. So what they did was they started this anti-Assyrian campaign. So they wanted to go against the Assyrians. And this movement was headed up by a man named Pekah, who aligned himself with Rezin of Damascus. But having seen what happened to Samaria by the Assyrians, King Ahaz wants no part of this anti-Assyrian coalition. Okay, he doesn't want to get involved because he's pretty certain that Assyria can squash them all. This led to a group of allied kings from these western regions that wanted to develop this anti-Assyrian coalition. A number of the kings in this region wanted to depose Ahaz. They wanted to get rid of him so that they could then in turn go against Assyria. If they could have gotten rid of him, it would have meant the end of the Davidic kingdom. With Jerusalem under attack and Ahaz in a panic, the only way Ahaz could see to save the kingdom was to implore powerful Assyria to save Jerusalem. So it's this classic case of my enemy's enemy is my friend. And so you have this region in which people or kingdoms are beginning to play the different powers off of one another. And that's a huge part of the backstory behind Isaiah's writings.
I know.
Today?
It sounds like Game of Thrones.
Yes, it is, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Huh?
Like today.
It sounds like today, and we'll talk about that on Sunday.
Who did he implore?
Ahaz went to the Assyrians because he didn't want to be in the anti-Assyrian coalition.
Okay.
He went to the Assyrians and begins making deals with them.
Okay.
Okay. So what you'll discover as you read 1st Isaiah are several verses in which Isaiah attempts to influence the king not to align with Assyria. So Isaiah is going to Ahaz and saying, "This is a bad idea. This is not good. Let's not do this." But Ahaz pushes forward anyway. And it's here we begin to read of Isaiah's assertion to rely on the hand of God rather than the weapons of Assyria's powerful army. But still, Ahaz decides that it's more expedient to be a son and a servant to the king of Assyria than to an invisible God. So the independence of Judah is surrendered to Assyria. So Ahaz basically forms this alliance with Assyria in order to protect himself. And part of that appeal to Tiglath-Pileser, the king of Assyria, includes the silver and the gold from the treasuries of the temple and the royal palace. Okay, so there's this huge amount of treasure that takes place, but also an agreement to pay an ongoing tribute to Assyria on a regular basis. So they're always going to be paying for that protection, paying for that alliance. So now with Judah under its control, Assyria is enabled to continue its march westward as far as the border of Egypt, which is, remember, is one of the things that they were looking at, and basically turn everything else into this series of Assyrian provinces throughout that area of Samaria and Judah. Now, during this time, Isaiah is telling Ahaz that it was neither Pekah nor Rezin nor even the might of Tiglath-Pileser who governed history, but God. And so that's one of the things that we're going to see, is that Isaiah is continually saying, no, it's not this person of power, it's not this person of power, it's not even this powerful Assyrian king, it's God who is in control of history. And that the might of Assyria would not last forever. Accompanied by his son, Shir-Jashub, which is really just a symbolic name expressing conviction that a remnant would remain and return to Israel. And this may be some evidence of where we see that reading back in that redaction, that re-editing back into there. Anyway, that there would be a remnant that would return to Israel and be saved. So, accompanied by his son, Isaiah appeals to the king to be calm. But it's at this point that Isaiah announces that a young woman will have a son, and his name will be called Emmanuel, and that before the age of 2 or 3 years, the allied kings would have departed from the land. Now, we need to note here that this is a very short duration. This is 2 to 3 years. This is not 600, 700 years that take us up to the birth of Christ, which is how this text is often interpreted within the Gospels. King Ahaz and Isaiah continue to grow further and further apart, and the king is ready to abandon all of his religious principles, all of his faith, and just give that all up if it will gain him this emperor's favor and continued favor. So while others are celebrating Ahaz for obtaining such powerful protection for him and his kingdom, Isaiah continues to insist that all of Assyria is going to bring them, or all Assyria is going to bring them, is disaster. Okay. So before long, Tiglath-Pileser dies. He dies in 727. So let's say 727. I'm just going to say TP
Yeah.
dies. Say what?
That's what we do in our notes. So we're like, I'm not writing that whole thing.
Tiggy.
Yeah. Tigger. There you go.
So bouncy, sorry.
And when he dies, suddenly throughout this western region, there's these hopes of independence that begin to stir. Okay, so if this powerful leader is dead, if this powerful king's dead, then maybe, just maybe, we've got a chance to get out from under this yoke of oppression. And this excitement over possible independence leads all these Assyrian provinces that have been set up to begin seeking assistance from where? Egypt, the other side. So they go to the Egyptian king. Again, playing one enemy against another, which becomes an incredibly dangerous game to play. So in reprisal for them going to Egypt and seeing about protection there, Assyria attacks Samaria again in 722 BC. Now they had originally gone into them in about 740 BC. So it's these 2 decades, 722. Yeah.
Judah goes to Egypt. Is it Judah that
Well,
goes to Egypt?
All of these western provinces, all of this area has been taken over.
And so they're going to Egypt, to look at Egypt now.
So they turn to
Okay.
Egypt to come against Assyria,
Right.
to support them in a campaign against Assyria.
Who's currently got them under their heavy boot.
Correct, correct. So when Assyria gets word of this, they go back in where they've already been oppressing Samaria, or the northern kingdom of Israel, and it's at this point that they go in and they disperse all the people. They just take it over and just conquer them. And that's in 722. So that's 722 then becomes the first diaspora, which is scattering. But that's not quite the exile yet. But that's, I'll say more about that here in just a second. So in 722, Samaria completely falls to a new king of Assyria, Sargon III. Now that sounds like Lord of the Rings, right? At which time all of Israel is overthrown, basically, the northern kingdom, and the captives are scattered as slaves throughout Assyria. Now, I found this excerpt from a website called Jewish Virtual Library that did a good depiction of what takes place here. Now, we're not going to find this, we'll find little bits and pieces of it, but this is sort of a side note to Isaiah, because remember, he's concerned with Judah, the southern kingdom, okay? But this is just a little context of Israel, the northern kingdom. So, in 722 BC, the Assyrians conquered Israel. The Assyrians were aggressive and effective. The history of their dominance over the Middle East is a history of constant warfare. In order to assure that conquered territories would remain pacified, the Assyrians would force many of the native inhabitants to relocate to other parts of the empire. They almost always chose the upper and more powerful classes, for they had no reason to fear the general mass of a population. They would send Assyrians to relocate in the conquered territory. When they conquered Israel, they forced the 10 tribes to scatter throughout their empire. For all practical purposes, you might consider this a proto-diaspora, is what they say, diaspora being scattering. Except that these Israelites disappear from history permanently. They're called the 10 lost tribes of Israel. Now, why this happened is difficult to assess. The Assyrians did not settle the Israelites in one place, but scattered them in small populations all over the Middle East. When the Babylonians later conquered Judah, not the context of 1st Isaiah, they too relocate a massive amount of the population. However, they move that population to a single location so that the Jews can set up a separate community and still retain their religion and identity. The Israelites deported by the Assyrians, however, do not live in separate communities and soon drop their Yahweh religion and their Hebrew names and identities. And that's kind of what we were talking about originally, that they just sort of disappear. They become part of the landscape. They join other tribes. They become lost. Now, what's interesting about these 10 lost tribes is that it's from this event that we get these 10 lost tribes that lead eventually to the formation of several theories about where those tribes went. And one of those theories is that one or more of the tribes came to America. And this is where we get the Mormons. Okay? Has nothing to do with Isaiah. But it was fun. It was an interesting fact. But that's right. The lost tribes of Israel are the Mormons. They're the lost tribes.
They were teleported, right?
They actually crossed the
Jesus
land bridge and
the
Other way,
became,
okay.
yeah,
Jesus
became the native
came
people.
to
And the
South
native people
America.
buried.
Well, yeah, there's still a statue of him there.
Well, but that's the Mormons think that Jesus
They
came.
came there and Jesus
Sorry,
shows up
Burma.
there.
It's your fault, you got us off.
But they didn't know that until they discovered the golden tiles, the golden plates.
The two tribes, obviously one of them was Judah, the other one was it Benjamin?
Matt?
Not Matt.
Oh,
Oh,
Benjamin,
is it Benjamin?
pretty sure.
That's what was in my head, but I
Oh,
didn't,
the
wasn't confident.
I was gonna say
Judah
Reuben.
would be
Yeah.
one.
No, I'm pretty sure it's Judah. and Benjamin.
Well, Judah's right. Judah's one.
Right, First Kings.
I thought I had a map of the tribes. Yes. Yes. Judah and Benjamin. Judah was the southernmost, Benjamin just north of that, and then Ephraim, and then the rest. I have a map.
Gilligan
of that.
silence. And the rest.
see. So, in 715, Ahaz is succeeded by his son, Hezekiah, who reigns from 715 to 687. The
I know.
I kinda like PT, yeah.
And it's Hezekiah's marvelous career that is predicted by Isaiah while he's still an infant. Again, sort of speaking back to that Emmanuel idea that points more to Hezekiah than it does to Jesus, if we're going to look at it. So Hezekiah was opposite of his father, and his first act was to repair the temple and restore the services of the priests and the Levites. Still, Hezekiah seems to realize that despite the ongoing tribute and strain that Assyria has placed on the kingdom of Judah, to throw off the yoke of Assyria would be to court disaster. So, in the meantime, while this is going on, Egypt is taken over by a powerful Ethiopia. And Egypt begins to influence southern Palestine against Assyria. So now the Ethiopians, now Egypt, are suggesting that Palestine sort of revolt and fight back. So again, you have this turmoil in this region. At this time, many of the areas previously conquered by Assyria, with the backing of Egypt, developed simultaneous attacks on Assyria. Egypt, upon entering Jerusalem, is then greeted as a deliverer of the people from the Assyrian yoke, which the poor and the oppressed and the helpless see as what God's been waiting for to deliver them. Okay? However, Isaiah warns the people that their alliances, he assures them that God has not yet arrived, nor will the Ethiopian Egypt be the one to bring about the end of the oppression. To illustrate the futility of depending on Egypt and the disaster to which this will lead, Isaiah walks about Jerusalem in the scanty garb of a slave. And this is a symbol for what he sees as laying in store for Ethiopia and Egypt. Now, upon the death of Sargon III, his son, Sennacherib, took over the rule of Assyria, and Hezekiah took over the rule of Assyria. So Hezekiah, thinking that maybe the time's right for defending Judah's independence, refuses to pay the tribute to Assyria. Now, about the same time, and I didn't even look at this in the Hebrew, so this is just going to be a crapshoot in this transliteration. Merodach-Baladan, sound good? Yeah. Okay. That's Heschel's transliteration. He establishes himself as the king of Babylon and goes looking for allies to fight with him against Assyria. So now we have Babylon looking to take over Assyria. We have Egypt under Ethiopian control looking to take over Assyria with Judah and their kingdom. And so this Merodach, this new king that followed Sargon III in Assyria, sends envoys and letters and gifts to Hezekiah, and Hezekiah is so overjoyed with such distinguished visitors that Hezekiah shows them everything that's in his treasure house and his armory, because he wants to impress them.
Not so smart.
Isaiah then reappears to denounce Hezekiah's enthusiasm for this newfound friendship, and again predicts destruction and exile for the people. But Hezekiah refuses Isaiah's counsel and joins this alliance. I'm sorry, it was Egypt that had come into Jerusalem, and that's who Hezekiah is enamored with.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
I said that wrong. So the policy adopted by Hezekiah is tactically the same as his father's, except that Hezekiah turns to Egypt for protection, where his father had turned to Assyria. Isaiah's utter contempt for worldly power and his disgust for dependence on weapons and warfare made it impossible for him to approve any military alliance. For Isaiah, alliance on any military alliance, or reliance on any military alliance, meant the denial of God's power over history. Therein, Isaiah predicts that the alliance with Egypt will prove worthless and empty and do nothing more than bring shame and disgrace on the people and end in disaster. So about 703, Sennacherib embarks on a series of blows against the rebels. Okay, so Assyria coming in against the rebels that have joined with Egypt, and they invade Judah, and they overthrow 46 of the fortified cities, which are then turned over to the pro-Assyrian Philistines, okay, which, if I recall correctly, are part of the people that Uzziah overthrew in the first place. So they've got a bone to pick anyway. And this population at this point is deported in these 46 fortified cities. So Sennacherib then sets up his headquarters in Judah's frontier fortress, in one of these fortresses, and he awaits Hezekiah's surrender. Still, despite all the neighboring kingdoms either having surrendered or been crushed, and despite the country being overrun by the Assyrians, and despite the worthlessness of the Egyptian alliance, Hezekiah is encouraged by Isaiah's prediction that the city will never fall, and closes himself up in this central fortified fortress. And by some miraculous act of God, the fortress stands. Now that's where you were saying that they had them like a rat in a cage. Is that what you were saying? A bird in a cage.
Basically.
Right. So the fortress stands, and so here's how the story goes: that soon this pestilence sweeps through the Assyrian camps, and it decimates the army. And the army is forced to retreat. Sennacherib returns to the Assyrian capital of Nineveh, and he's eventually murdered by his own sons. Which brings us back to 701. Okay, and that's where chapter 39 really winds up. Now, what happens from here on out is that between 701 and 625, or about 3/4 of a century, Judah continues to be sort of a vassal kingdom, a dependency under the Assyrian emperor. And that is until Babylon comes and the Babylonians overthrow Assyria, but that's out of the scope of where we are with first Isaiah. Crystal clear, right? So let's try and go back and see what I didn't clear well.
I see a thread, at least.
Okay.
It's,
That,
go ahead.
that Isaiah is saying, don't depend on any of these
Right.
people.
Right.
Depend on God. And
Right.
so
So we might say, this history, we can try and memorize it all, but it's really not that important. What we need to get is we need to see that these kings have continually tried to play one enemy off the other. Sometimes they've gone and said, well, my religion doesn't really matter, this doesn't really matter, I'm going to go for protection, whether it's fighting against my own people or trying to find protection from my own people or from these invading armies and these other superpowers. And it's just this constant battle that's going on throughout these years from 783 to 687. So it's covering about a span of 100 years. And it's just this incredible tumultuous time. But Isaiah doesn't actually come in until late in Uzziah's reign. So he doesn't really have that much to do. His primary people that he's speaking to are Ahaz and then his son Hezekiah, who some believe that he was actually pointing to as this hero savior king.
That's gotta be disappointing.
To us?
Isaiah,
The-
Oh.
to
the
Isaiah,
Hezekiah.
well,
They outlasted
he
the
didn't turn out
Assyrians.
to be what Isaiah
They
thought.
outlasted the Assyrians.
They outlasted the Assyrians.
Oh, yeah.
Not by much, but they did, so I mean,
But he's turned out to be just a ruler, just almost like his father, right?
Yeah,
That's what-
yeah, only playing Egypt as the alliance, instead of, Assyria.
Without trying to draw an accurate map, but maybe just like with squares and triangles, the three powers that you talked about, Babylon, Syria, and Egypt, relative to where Judah considered its homeland.
This is the downfall of Israel,
Okay.
the northern kingdom. So this is Syria, this is Assyria, but Assyria really takes over Syria.
it's actually further to.
But Egypt is,
Here.
Yeah, Assyria
and
and Syria
Egypt
get
is
mixed
down
up
here.
for me.
Right.
Okay, right.
Assyria
And
Babylon
I'm
over here.
giving
This
you
is
all these,
desert.
not so that it
They
makes
don't
sense
march
now,
army through.
because it doesn't have to make sense
And
right
there's
now.
the Hittites up here,
This
which
is
are
just-
all kind of
this is
gone
just
wayside at this point, but
The beginnings.
this strip of land is fought over by
Um,
empires from all three directions constantly.
Of what you can
and the
take with
Assyrians
you
and the Babylon
when you
are
begin to
from
read.
the
Yeah.
same
Phoenicians.
They're going the
geography.
same direction
they're not-
because
they
they
haven't
wanna
talked
march
about
through
them.
march through
Okay.
the Arabian desert. They wanna march up the river and then down the river. There. And the Assyrians are in the north and the Babylonians are further south down these
Moabites, the Moabites,
Okay.
that Ruth, wasn't
So
Ruth married
that
to a
affect who the
Moabite?
Assyrians to
Well,
go there, or do they?
well, eventually Babylon conquers Assyria,
Oh,
and
okay.
then they're like, well, now we're gonna march all the way
Oh,
up.
yeah.
These two trade back and forth, who's in power,
Okay,
until Persia
They're not
comes in from over
generals,
here
that's the good guys.
and runs the
with all
world.
that, okay.
And then
Babylon and all that stuff.
Alexander.
Right,
comes
from
along
one perspective
and
here.
then Rome comes from,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then the US comes.
And then the
And
US
then the
comes
Brits
right.
come, and then,
Patriot, who's tired.
All four of them.
fourth of them plays.
No, just two of them are playing. If it works, fixing.
One of the things I found interesting about this is that for a long time, there was pretty wide skepticism about the whole Assyrian invasion and siege of Jerusalem and everything, that it actually happened, because there was no proof of it. And they found in the 30s or 40s or 50s, somewhere around there, a hardened clay, multi-sided tablet that actually has, it's the annals of King Sennacherib that actually, that's where
Yeah,
have him caged up like a bird comes from. But it actually does show a lot of the same things, including one of the things we talked about in Second Kings about drying up the wells and streams into Jerusalem, which was interesting because earlier or later that actual tactic is used to take over Jerusalem, as far as walling off the waters and so. No, that's not in Jerusalem. Right?
Jerusalem's-
Sorry.
yeah, other
In other places,
Jerusalem
yeah.
does actually have has had since the Bronze Age, I think, the wall of the city juts out around an oasis that comes up there. And then Hezekiah digs a tunnel.
Oh,
And by
that's in the
tunnel, I
picture.
mean, by tunnel,
There's
A
a picture.
tunnel,
I mean-
tunnel, it is as wide as my shoulders.
Yeah.
Or
and
narrower.
tall enough for you to walk
Walk
through.
through. And it's water running mid-shin, that's ice cold. But you can walk through the whole
First
thing
one.
and
There's
it's
a
just
picture
straight.
of it in
Yeah.
here, I think.
We
Yeah.
have pictures of it.
It's in the
somewhere.
one of Sennacherib's
rock.
campaign.
Yeah.
There it is.
Somebody donated a rock
From
to Second
Hezekiah's-
Starks that came with a
Runs
little
from the
label that
Gihon
says-
Spring.
I didn't know
The
it was
Gihon
one.
Spring, which is the one in the valley where that the wall went out around. The problem is the walls move as the city moves and stuff like that. And at some point, the spring, you couldn't get to it from outside the walls, but there was this tunnel that would bring the water back inside the city itself, to the pools of, and it's eventually what becomes the pools of Siloam, we think, maybe.
That's one of the ways they can survive the siege.
It is
They
one way they
keep it.
survive the siege, is that there's fresh water coming into the city. And a lot of these cities, that was the big question, was how do you survive the summer first and then a siege if you don't have water? And so a lot of them spring and that's where you built the city, or they've dug up these massive underground chasms, things that we could fit the fellowship hall in, and that just get filled with water during the rainy season.
Huh.
There, and if you're, so you need to protect that.
Water that we could build the fellowship hall in?
No, a chasm.
Just like us.
It's our water system.
So if we
Or
get
save it up for a
seafood,
dry
we're
day.
fine.
Yeah.
They didn't, but.
Any of you ever really want to do the drive, unless it's out on loan at the moment, his annals are up in Chicago at University of Chicago,
Oh.
along with some of the stuff from Sargon and Mike, so they actually have a really good collection of this era of Assyrian and Babylonian stuff. Anyone ever wants to drive up to the Oriental Institute?
Oh, I was gonna say, is it in the Oriental Institute?
It is.
How about that?
So my hope in throwing all of this information at you is that as you read, some of these things will be like those little light bulbs that go off. Oh, that's what that means. Whereas without all of this
Yeah, well.
flotsam and jetsam, you may not have been able to make what little sense you may be able to make out of Isaiah anyway. And I mean, for me, the key is to keep us from just pulling these little pieces out that we often do. And in a lot of ways, you have to.
It's poetic.
Right,
It's very.
right. You have to pull some of it out because we can't preach on entire books at a time, or we'd get like this. A few more comments that I want to make, and then I think we'll break up or take any questions, try and clear any things up we might need to. Christopher cites in interpretation, he likens the book of Isaiah to an orchestral score written by a coalition of composers. In this way, he says, one can grasp certain recurring themes that help unite the work and give it meaningful structure. Themes like Zion, the outstretched hand of God, God's plan of old, the thorns and the briars motif. But there are also discrete developments and non-recurring motifs that appear in the context of an individual movement alone. So, it's this flowing piece of music that you get little pieces from. He also suggests that Isaiah is said to contain nothing but salvation, and so it's distinguished from Jeremiah's opening message of judgment, and Ezekiel's half-judgment, half-salvation proclamation. And this kind of comes back to what Nikki was saying earlier. This may be why the pre-modern Christian church was eager to paint Isaiah as not just the first and greatest prophet, but as the first apostle and evangelist. Because after all, Isaiah is cited more in the New Testament than any other book in the Old Testament, perhaps because of Isaiah's outlook on the future and salvation through the agency of an unnamed Messiah. Was that Jesus, or was that Hezekiah? Yeah. Is that enough?
So if I do a Google search about one of these kings to check the years he was around or whatever, is there enough agreement between theological diverse people that I'm going to get in general the same answer? Or is there, or is the
Unless
right
there's-
wing and the left wing disagreeing on some of this history?
I don't think there's going to be a whole lot of disagreement. I mean, everything, I didn't put circa, up
Right,
there
I
under
understand
each
it's
one, but it's
approximate.
all just about,
Yeah.
hereabouts.
The kings, there'll be less debate about. You might move a year or two here or there. They'll argue, he died 2 years later, he died 2 years earlier,
Yeah.
because they're, getting flexy. Now, when you get to like, when did the prophet live, then you're gonna have, it'll depend a lot on how they read. If they read this as all the work of one prophet and taking a very traditional understanding of the text, then they're gonna give you, he started preaching this day because it says that here, and then it goes on until the death date of this guy.
And if you have a study Bible, you may very well have a timeline that depicts the kings, the time of the king's reigns and things like that.
Dave, what I'm wondering is probably where we get into that left versus right is in the interpretation of,
That's what I would have guessed as
Yeah.
well, but I didn't wanna
Right.
go in blind with.
So I guess I hadn't heard before they got the Messiah was not Jesus, but it was Hezekiah as,
Well, that's.
that was a debate,
That's an interpretation, because Isaiah does say, that, within this amount of, there's gonna be a child born to a young woman, not a virgin. That's not in Isaiah. A young woman, huh?
It's in the Greek version.
And they're in, King James. So that's not the Hebrew text. The Hebrew text suggests a young woman of marrying age, okay? And that within a couple of years of this child being born,
12, 16.
the Assyrians are gonna be gone.
Tribal.
And the Assyrians, what happened?
Well, the Assyrians eventually are gone,
But
be-
they're, go ahead.
because that's where we talked about, the Assyrians come in and, under Hezekiah, and Hezekiah holds up in his capital city, in his stronghold, and for some reason,
Oh, yeah, then
it
they all-
holds, and then there's this disease that, rats and
They didn't
whatever,
hold the
this
wall.
pestilence that runs through the camps and everybody gets sick, and so, Sennacherib has to, retreat back to Nineveh, where he's eventually killed by his sons in a struggle for power.
And so they, okay, I'm just trying to put it all together, so.
I've always heard Sennacherib, Sennacherib, Sennacherib,
Yeah, it's
whatever we
fine,
wanna make it,
whatever.
right?
Back
I
on.
can go ask some of my friends that are a little
Right.
more into Akkadian than I am and look at the proper, they're called, he's done Akkadian, but I don't know if he's done.
So in essence, a prophecy happened, because he said the Syrians,
He'll die.
go in
Yeah.
a few years,
He'll
and
tell
they
me
did.
like
Yeah.
3 different ways he spelled.
But then they were overtaken by the Babylonians, and the Babylonians came.
Yeah,
So yeah, he was right about the Assyrians.
yeah.
Was there ever a time between then and now that there was ever
Took off with that idea.
Yeah, I don't think I ever heard that.
rest in that area? I just keep, as we said earlier, it's just plain it all over again, and the borders are
After the,
moving, and this group and that group, and
after the Persians let them out, they have relative calm for a while. Not zero strife, but not actively being conquered for a bit until Alexander invades and takes over the world.
And then after Alexander, you've got his kids can't decide on who's going to rule what, and so they start fighting with each other. And you do a lot of back and forth. When there's a brief period of independence under the Maccabees, and then Rome comes in, and Rome grants them peace.
They actually, well, they actually ask the Romans to
They ask
come
them,
in,
yeah.
because we don't want the Greeks anymore, so please come here, Romans.
Yeah.
So you're still back to that
Right.
Egypt or Assyria, Greek or Rome?
And
Yeah.
the Maccabees is some of the same thing, is they find a guy who's weak, and
Oh,
This
years
is the
from
tunnel.
now.
that's the tunnel, that's me in the tunnel.
That's Matt in the
Thousands of
tunnel.
years.
That's an actual watermark from Wading Hill.
Ah,
Yeah.
and that was built.
That was dug by
Um,
Hezekiah's people,
We
we
think,
think.
you can't date stone,
I mean, what are you,
so
what are
I
you gonna
can't
do?
tell
Well,
when
yeah, I
exactly
mean,
it
you can
chipped.
see.
There was an inscription that turned up that fits a hole carved into the rock in the tunnel.
oh, okay.
That, so
Is
it's
writing
probably
consistent
from
with the
there.
right age?
And it's, the lettering is from that era, and it talks about, describes how they were digging from 2 directions and met in the middle and stuff like that, which is how
Wait,
it
without a
describes it.
GPS?
Somebody dug a 530-meter
Mhm.
tunnel,
Yeah,
big enough to walk through.
no, it was following.
It's
you know,
following
Somehow-
some
it's
natural,
following
there are
some natural
places where you can
cave,
clearly
but-
see you're going through like some
And
cracks
they
in
were
the rock.
basically expanding
Wow.
the cave,
But-
but they still did it,
Yeah,
so.
they did it, and they met in the middle.
and
Or at least they got through.
They claim they did that, so. And given that there aren't a lot of dead ends off of it,
And
they
it's flipping
seem.
dark in there.
Yeah, and they're
They don't have
underground, it's not like they
electrical
have the sunlight to help them
Well,
like the
it's
railroads did,
constantly
but they
running
went
water.
from
Yeah.
east to
And
west,
it's
and
higher
we think
during
that
breaking
we see
season.
where each
Yeah.
one
So,
was.
And it's already dry
So you
season,
were
it's already-
standing, you were still
Yeah,
standing,
we
you
were
were standing
I
in
was
water.
standing, it was
Standing, you
misty.
can see there's a water
Oh,
line in
yeah,
his
oh
shorts.
my gosh, yeah.
When you first get in, it gets out to about mid-thigh,
Mhm.
and then it gets down to mid-shin or so for
Oh.
most of it. It's cold.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
But
It's
when
coming
it's
from an
105
underground spring.
degrees outside, you're like, yeah, this
Yeah.
is great.
Yeah, no kidding.
So
At
I,
least for the
and
first
it's relatively fresh
20
water.
meters.
I mean,
I
it's.
still wouldn't drink it, but yes.
No.
Yeah.
If you're under siege, it
Well,
doesn't
if I'm
matter.
walking.
Question and a comment. The comment is that, I've heard you talk about how this before, and I've also heard my friend Ellen, who visited Israel not too many years ago, and is Jewish. She said, you know, once one city was leveled or whatever, they just build right on top of it, and that has helped with finding all this history, which is, we can be really grateful for that. But
I mean, here's probably the best place for
You
that.
find,
Yeah.
you know, you're in this plain and there's this sudden mountain in the middle of the plain.
Yeah.
There's
It's
an
city.
old city on top of it,
It's a
you
city,
start digging
yeah.
down, you find older cities.
Wow.
Nice stacked on top of each other. It's really nice though.
And I never knew what diaspora meant, or proto-diaspora, until tonight. I've heard that term before. So it's just where the Jews
Scattering.
scattered.
Scattering.
Dispersion, right.
Usually specifically the Jews.
Jay refers to the Glen Mary priests who have left.
That's the diaspora.
Yeah. They're all over the place.
A whole bunch of them, huh?
So
All over
our,
the place.
our assignment is to
One-
read the first,
1 through 39.
okay.
That's what we're working with this first month. Right.
So at the end of the month, we'll be done with Isaiah 1.
Yes.
First,
And,
theoretically.
yeah.
So he never
We'll
has
know
speech
everything
on
there
it
is
again.
gonna happen.
So I don't know if I will have time to do this, but if I do, is there interest in a web-based timeline that we can look at?
Sure.
There's probably one out there.
Yeah, I'm guessing.
Oh, I bet there is too.
There is
Yeah, so-
already, but.
I'll
And
try and
then
draw
what
through
do
some
you-
of the pictures, 'cause I think we actually have pictures of several of the sites that are
Oh, that's.
Oh,
relevant to
cool.
here.
Which we could attach to this.
You can touch the time, we could also put to the Google
You're
group.
into this
Oh, maybe.
timeline thing right
I
now,
kinda
Dave,
am,
aren't ya?
It's kind of fun, it really is, like, going
It's very,
and
very different now, reading this, seeing.
reading it and going,
oh,
okay,
I
I've
was
been there.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I find that interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And then we may or may not handle second and third together. I'll have to take a look at that.
So we'll meet the second Tuesday in December, come back together as a group,
That
is
would be the plan, yes.
With a new book?
With an intro to, not a new book, we'd finish Isaiah. We'll
Just
finish Isaiah
first
before we
one.
move on.
First part of Isaiah.
See where we are.
So when we meet the
Isaiah
next-
1 to 39 this month. So we would
We're doing
start
first
Isaiah.
Yeah, but
Isaiah.
if we meet again the first Tuesday or whatever
Of
in
December.
December, is that going to be the background on another book?
No, no, we'll only be
Second
done with,
Isaiah,
we'll only be done with the first
possibly second and third Isaiah.
Oh, okay,
rest
so
of the
we'll
book.
finish, oh,
Right,
okay, good.
right, we'll finish Isaiah before we move
Okay,
on. But I don't, yeah.
Yeah, it depends on what you mean by book. If second Isaiah is a different book, then yeah.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
All right,
All right.
very good. Thanks for your patience and waiting
Thank you
through
for
this.
your work.
We'll see how it goes, you know, I mean,
I do is have recall reference.
we'll learn it together, so, you know.
Israel kings and Judah kings and who.
So we're just,
reigned.
No, we are
just
not.
go to that website and just throw
We're
in
not.
a comment or ask a question.
Start a new thread, yeah.
Devour.
And it doesn't, we don't have to read the whole.
Well, there's David,
I would
like,
Not necessarily.
No, no, like, just
But,
there,
but you
yeah.
might,
Kind of bad
you
one.
might read, I mean, you might read through it and just make note of
I'm
your
glad that
questions
there
as you
are,
go,
Yeah.
in case
And
they
then
get
go back
answered
to the- yeah.
in the next chapter, okay?
I wish we had a little bing or something that would let us know that our comment was.
Well,
It'll-
again,
you'll get-
training.